Good morning, AP Government. As you know, I am in Germany right now, so we're going to be continuing the executive branch virtually. So I'll be posting these videos on Canvas. You should have access to the outlines either virtually or on paper. And we will keep going through the executive branch today. So what we're going to look at today is the president's conflicts with Congress. We'll be talking about how the president has to interact with Congress to get people appointed, like cabinet members and ambassadors and federal judges. We will also look at how the president's powers have changed over time, from the justification for having one president found in Federalist 70 to how presidents' powers have evolved and grown throughout our country's history. So one of the big themes in this course is going to be the growth of presidential power. Over time, the executive branch has come to be seen as more important. It has come to be seen as the most powerful branch. And so we'll explore how that has worked. So first thing, in Federalist 70, you've got Alexander Hamilton, and he is responding to criticisms of the Constitution by the anti-federalists. So in Federalist 70, Alexander Hamilton says, basically, hey, we need one chief executive. The anti-federalists had called for a council of presidents who would be more like figureheads and wouldn't have that much power. But in Federalist 70, Hamilton defends a unitary and energetic executive. He says there needs to be one person who is president. If there's a group, they're going to fight. And the fight is supposed to happen in the legislative branch, not the executive branch. So he says there should be one president who has enough power to respond and carry out the laws as they need to. So a couple of the places where presidents come into conflict with Congress, one is over the issue of appointments. Presidents are in charge of appointing people to their cabinet. They are in charge of appointing ambassadors to other countries, and they are in charge of appointing all federal judges, including the U.S. Supreme Court. But that's all federal judges at lower level courts as well. So that's a lot of power, and all of those appointments have to be approved by the Senate. So if the Senate is of one party and the president is of the other, that can lead to a lot of conflict. One of the pictures that I've got up here is of then President Barack Obama with someone that he had nominated for the Supreme Court named Merrick Garland. Garland would have replaced a conservative justice who had died. Republicans controlled the Senate at the time, and they refused to vote on Garland. They did not meet with him. They did not move forward with his process at all. They just basically ignored him until Obama was out of office after 2016, and President Trump came into office and appointed someone that would be more favorable to Republicans. So there can be a lot of conflict between presidents and the Senate when it comes to getting these folks jobs. Of course, presidents propose legislation, but that legislation is going to go through a lot of changes by the time it actually makes it to the president's desk. Presidents can call for laws to do certain things, but it's up to Congress to actually pass it. And so, again, by the time it gets to the president's desk, it's going to have gone through a lot of changes and edits. It may not be quite what the president wanted, and then they have to decide whether they're going to sign or veto it. We've talked about executive orders previously. This is a way for the president to get around Congress. The president passes an executive order, which can't contradict the law. It has to work within existing law, but it does give the president pretty broad powers over how they will choose to enforce that law. And so executive orders happen without Congress. They have the force of law, but they can be undone by any future president. And so it's a lot easier for a future president to get rid of an executive order than it is for them to change a law. So executive orders, you don't need Congress to do it, but they can be undone by future presidents. And then, of course, presidents are going to come into conflict with Congress over war powers. Technically, declaring war is Congress's job, but presidents are the commander in chief, and presidents' power to make war has grown over time. The last time Congress technically declared war was World War II. But obviously, we've had lots of military conflicts since then. Presidents have seen their war-making powers grow, and Congress has declined. So again, president's power growing. We're just continuing with this theme. The top phrases, unitary executive or imperial presidency, are two ways of describing this trend of the president's power growing. That basically presidents are able to do more with fewer checks, especially from the legislative branch. Congress was originally designed to be the main policy-making branch. Over time, that has changed, and presidents are seen as the ones being in charge of government. So let's look at some examples of how Congress has delegated, Congress has given up some of its power. During the Vietnam War, Congress passed what was called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, where they saw how unpopular war could be, and they gave the president really broad war-making powers. So the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution comes first. Presidents get basically a blank check to make war themselves. Eventually, in the 70s, that gets reined in. Congress passes the War Powers Act, which was supposed to curb some of that war-making power. But still, even after the War Powers Act, presidents have really broad power over military conflict and making war without a declaration of war from Congress. All they need is permission. We'll get to this term later on. All they need is authorization from Congress to make war. So the War Powers Act, presidents still have this broad power over making war. We often see presidents come into office with an economic plan in mind that they want Congress to pass. During the Great Depression, President Roosevelt took the lead with the New Deal. He was coming up with a lot of programs. He was making as many of them by executive power as he could without Congress. Anytime they got struck down by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional, he would just make more. Lyndon Johnson came up with the Great Society. We've talked about this before. That was his name for programs like Medicare and Medicaid. So with New Deal programs like Social Security, Great Society programs like Medicare and Medicaid, you see presidents taking the lead on economic policy and dramatic reshaping of life in the nation. So even though they needed Congress to create these programs, they needed Congress to pass the actual laws, it was presidents who kind of led the charge as far as creating these programs. If Congress is unable to do anything, this idea of gridlock, if Congress can't do something, sometimes presidents will step in and say, okay, I'll do it myself by executive order. So they respond to gridlock. They respond to Congress not being able to make something happen by stepping in and doing it themselves. President Obama did this when Congress couldn't get an immigration bill passed. Obama stepped in and did as much as he could simply with presidential power by executive order. He watched the bill fail in Congress, and when it did, he said, I'm going to do what I can just by presidential power. The last part says bureaucratic discretion. We're going to do a whole chapter on the bureaucracy later, but just understand there are a lot of federal agencies and departments, and they have a lot of freedom to make their own rules. So these agencies, departments, and commissions, they have the power when Congress creates them. they have the power to make rules, and that power is called discretion. They have the power to make rules that businesses and people have to follow. Sometimes presidents look out at a crisis and they feel like they need to take action very quickly, like following up on the attacks on September 11th. They may look at a crisis and say, okay, I'm going to take quick action. I'm not sure whether or not it's constitutional, but I just see the need to respond in a crisis. Presidents find themselves with more power based on how popular they are and based on public opinion. And so if they're popular, Congress will kind of go along with what they're doing. If they're less popular, then Congress will push back more on what they're trying to do. Every once in a while, the legislative branch does try to limit or curb the powers of the president. So they may pass, or they have passed, the 22nd Amendment, which limits the president to 2 elected terms. So no more FDRs, no more presidents elected 4 times. The president is limited to 2 elected terms. The 25th Amendment clarifies the line of succession and creates rules for what to do if a president is incapacitated. If the president can no longer perform the job, there are rules put in place by the 25th Amendment. Like I said, the War Powers Act was designed to limit some of the power given to the president by the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. So it curbed his war-making powers a little bit, but presidents still have a ton of war-making power. This acronym, AUMF, stands for Authorization for the Use of Military Force. And that's all presidents need to really be able to declare war without technically declaring war. Authorization. They just need permission from Congress to do it. And then the last thing, for attempts to curb presidential power, Congress can investigate presidential behavior and can attempt to impeach the president if they feel like the president is using their power irresponsibly or corruptly. All right, so that is all for today. We will continue with the executive branch next time. Make sure that you're following along on your notes. Make sure you're getting your reading notes done, and make sure you're getting done any assignments left for you to complete today in class. And be keeping up with this, because you will take your test and your FRQ while I'm still in Germany. And so you will be responsible for the material, even though I'm not there. So make sure that you're reviewing your notes, you're watching Heimler's history videos, you're doing what you need to do to keep up. After this test on legislative and executive branch, we'll get into bureaucracy, and then I'll be home soon. So I look forward to seeing you in the near future. But until then, I will talk to you in the next video.